speaking to a group of pastors is a little out of my box of not concerns, but I'm normally dealing with business people and trying to help them understand integration of faith in the workplace. And they always have the questions about, can it really happen in the secular field? They know in nonprofit Christian organizations, probably yes, but can it really happen in the secular market? So my background at Coca-Cola and Hanson's has been trying to model and guide the employees and the managers and the directors that there are biblical principles that every business can adhere to. And you don't have to get up on a chair with your Bible at 8 in the morning and say, hear ye, all come. And I'm going to give you a few verses today to guide your day. But it's interesting when people start modeling it in the workplace. It's interesting how people come to them and say, how did you handle that situation with such care, such compassion, and you weren't even angry? Well, a lot of times I was like that duck. I was a little angry, but you couldn't see it because I was flooding underneath that water. But all of us have that humanistic trait. So what do we want to accomplish today? Well, there will be some conflicting viewpoints, I'm sure, today. So I'm going to encourage Q&A at any time. Stop me, raise your hand, stomp, and let's discuss it. But I want to talk to you about what I believe there's a disconnect between the church and business. And we'll talk about not all the issues because we don't have time with all the issues. But I believe, unfortunately, people are racing into the pews, they're hearing the sermons, they're rushing out, they may be in a men or women's Bible study group, but basically there is a disconnect between the lay people and the pulpit. So we'll discuss that. All right, so what's our purpose? To examine whether there is a disconnect between the church and business, and if so, how it can be minimized. The number 2 purpose this morning is to review how the church and business can more effectively implement the integration of faith as a discipline in the marketplace. Let me say that again. To review how the church and business together can more effectively implement the integration of faith as a discipline in the marketplace. And third, to focus on Jesus as the head of the marketplace, as well as all that we do in our life and our business. Interesting, because Jesus is the focal point that I want to build this morning's visit on. Because I'm going to start and ask you this question. What life experiences do you think would be best to prepare Jesus for his later public ministry and for his distinctive divine human role as Messiah and Savior of the world? One more time. What life experiences do you think would best prepare Jesus for his later public ministry and for his distinctive divine human role as Messiah or Savior of the world? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Maybe growing food in his garden.
What?
Maybe growing food.
Growing food. The abundance part. It sort of has a little connotation of work, doesn't it? Uh-huh. Anybody else want to take a stab at that? Well, let me share with you that you would think as God prepared Jesus, it's interesting that he didn't send him into a priestly home like his forerunner, John the Baptist, right? He went into a priestly home, and Jesus, if he would have been in that priestly home, may have had more time for prayer and writing and thinking, and of course he went to the temple as a young man. But it's interesting, God has his own ideas and his master plan. So where did God place Jesus? In a carpenter's home, in a layperson's middle-class home. An interesting preparation for all of us that are trying to integrate faith, because he was really the expert at integrating faith. Now, he had around 12 years old, an apprenticeship with Joseph, and went into the ministry around 30, so he had 18 years in the workplace. Mentored by Joseph up to the time Joseph passed away. So he had great mentoring. He got involved in getting his hands dirty. And by the way, people, it's a nice introduction that Michael gave me, but you know, I started sweeping floors and loading trucks at Coca-Cola. And so I really relate to Jesus being an apprentice in that shop. You just don't become the CEO of a business. Very interesting. Sometimes I speak to the freshman students coming in the undergrad program to kick them off, and they get to ask questions. And the question I get most every year is, well, how long does it take to become a CEO, and how do you do it? And they want to miss all these steps. And basically my answer to them is very simple. It's very quick. And they say, really? If your dad owns the company. So anyway, so I really relate with Jesus because I know what apprenticeship was. My mentor was my father. And he really mentored me. And he was a great mentor in business. And everything was ethical. Everything was integrity. Everything was treatment of people correctly. So you go through that whole list of things. Well, I see this in Jesus' life and how he was impacting that community from a business standpoint. Just think he's negotiating maybe with a supplier. Maybe he's doing some sales and marketing. What about accounts receivable, accounts payable? What about just dealing with the interrelationships of people? What about competition? Doesn't talk much about it, but you know there is competition. So Jesus, through this 18 years, really got mentored, and he got a real exposure to what the business world was all about, while he was also doing his ministry within that area. The interesting thing about it, and you have a sheet in front of you, the white sheet, almost 50% of Jesus's parables have a business setting. So if you'll look at that, we're not going to go through these, but I thought you may want that for future reference if you're dealing with some of your business people within your church. There's all the parables basically that deal with Jesus in the marketplace. So they're ready for you to take a look at your convenience. But the other interesting thing is, look at the top. Our business world basically here in our country is divided into three sectors. Private, for-profit business, and look at that, 78.5% of our really GDP in this country is in the private sector. Not-for-profit is 6.5%, and public government is 15%. So you can see that spread. But the real issue is Jesus touched all three. Does anybody, we've talked about his for-profit business, but anybody have an idea how he touched the non-profit business? The ministry business?
In the synagogues.
In the synagogues, and through going to what? City to city, having people make donations, helping with some food. I mean, it's a non-profit position he was in. But the government's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because what did he say about the coin? Whatever Caesar's, whatever you give to Caesar what is Caesar's, right? So he honored the government's place in his ministry. So that little sheet just tells you a interesting breakdown of what's going on in the U.S. today. You know, all the things I'm going to talk to you about today comes from a great friend of mine, longtime friend, Klaus Isler. Did anybody have him for a class where you're going through here? His new book came out, and I'm just plugging it for him because I think it has some great stuff in it, especially in chapter 8. So if any of you look for a book, it's Living into the Life of Jesus. And I don't normally plug books, but he's such a good friend, and we visited about this class a little bit.
I'm sorry, what was the author's name?
Klaus, K-L-A-U-S, Isler. So basically, when Jesus said, the workers deserve their wages, he basically really understood what the workplace was all about, and people should get paid a fair wage. You know, we talk about business as ministry over at the School of Business, and we really believe that. That's our motto at the Crowell School of Business, business as ministry. And we believe that every business opportunity, from a housewife to a nurse to anybody that is touching people on a daily basis is a ministry. So he really understood genuine understanding of business as ministry. Okay, now it gets a little tougher for all of you. I want to set the stage for you and talk about communication gaps that are either perceived or real, and you can make that decision. We're going to spend most of the time understanding stress, tensions, and moral struggles in the workplace. I want you to walk out of here really to understand what the workplace stress and tension is for your congregation on a 24/7 basis out there in their work, because there are many. Then I want to talk to you a little about maybe things to consider to maybe bridge this communication gap. We're going to talk about two ideologies on wealth and the support of the poor, because that normally comes up in a pastoral business conversation. We're also going to talk about measuring full-time ministry versus secular careers. Full-time ministry versus secular careers. And we're going to not only talk about the tensions, I'm going to really, out of the 10 tensions I'm going to talk to you about, we're going to emphasize 2 of them. One of them is going to be love of God and the pursuit of profit is number 1. And number 2 is basically the love of God and competition. So we're going to focus on those 2, but I'm going to go through the others with you first. Finally, I'm going to talk to you about God's view of profit. Okay, we talk about what the secular world's doing with profit, but we're going to talk about God's view of profit. So that sort of gives you the umbrella of where we're tracking today. The handouts that I've given you, I will not reference a lot of it. Those are a lot for your edification. But let me just tell you what is in it for reference, and I will point to it, and then you'll know it. What I've done with the light yellow sheet, these are verses that apply to the workplace. Remember I said we're going to build off of Jesus? Well, lead like Jesus verses are ones I've pulled together through books and sermons and people and put that on there because we want to lead like Jesus. And on the back I put work-life proverbs. Now there are many more than that, but I just wanted to give you some insight to that. The gray sheet, we're going to talk about the biblical basis for mentoring, but those are verses that you can refer to if you're putting together a small sermon or a talk to a business group or your minute church. But on the back is an interesting one, and we won't go through all of them. But an interesting one is when I'm basically talking to business people, they talk, what are some of the things you really learned in the business world? Well, here's my baker's dozen. And you probably say, why is it a baker's dozen? Why don't you just cut off at 12? Because I couldn't leave off 13. Because I've done a lot of investing in businesses, but investors bet on management, never the product. Never the product. So anyway, we'll touch a few of these because a lot of them, of course, are biblically based. And then the goldenrod color is just because I quote some people that I really admire in the business world and in the academic world and in the missionary world. These are just some of their quotes. Now, the one that we'll focus on is in the middle of the sheet down there from A.W. Tozer, and that is really the key basis of what we're going to be discussing this morning. Let's look at that right now. One of the greatest hindrances to eternal peace which the Christian encounters is the common habit of dividing our lives into 2 areas, the sacred and the secular. As these areas are conceived to exist apart from each other and to be morally and separate and spiritually incompatible, and as we are compelled by the necessities of living to be always crossing back and forth from one to the other, our inner lives tend to break up so that we live a divided instead of a unified life. This is the old sacred secular, and thesis. Most Christians are caught in its trap. The clear impression the business person receives from the church is that to truly serve God, one must leave business and go into full-time service. So that's the basis of what we're going to be visiting on today. So you have these handouts, and we'll refer to them, but just want to know what you have. All right, let's have you do an inner reflection, and you can answer these to yourself, yes or no's. If you want to add something to it, please feel free to do it. This is going to set the stage for what I believe is a communication gap between business and church. Number one, do you consider the marketplace a mission field? Think about that. Do you believe the marketplace is a mission field? In your church as pastors, number two, do you commission members of your congregation as they depart for foreign mission trips? Uganda and Kenya, India, Mexico. Do you bring them up and pray for them and send them off? Number three, if you believe the marketplace is a mission field, do you bring business people forward to commissioning also? So if you believe that the marketplace is a mission field and you do commission others to go to outside the domestic U.S. for their mission field, do you at any time bring business people up for commissioning? How many sermons on the marketplace do you preach annually? Do you provide classes for the marketplace members, which should be on ethics, marketplace integration, evangelism, specifically for those that are in the workplace? Have you ever made a personal visit outside of the assignment in this class during work hours to any of your congregants' places of employment to better understand what they do? Do you believe your congregation members would come to you for guidance regarding business issues? Do you believe anybody in your congregation regarding business issues? Not family issues, not marital issues, not money issues, but business issues. Let me relate a story to you. I'm sitting and watching the news one night with my wife, about 11 o'clock, and I was always an early riser because I left about 5 in the morning, so this was about ready to turn this clicker off, and it said, flash. Students at the Garfield Roosevelt High School game were poisoned by Coca-Cola. That woke me up. And that was right in my area of responsibility. And I said to her, did you hear what they said? She said, yeah. I said, well, we've got Coca-Cola at Garfield High Field. So anyway, we had a process, and I dial a QC person, and within about an hour, we had everybody at our office building by midnight. And we have a team of about 8 or 10 to tackle issues like this. Everybody knew their assignment. We get to the stadium. I mean, every single newscaster of the world was there. CNN, Fox News, every local, bright lights. And of course, I step out of a car and they don't know who I am, so I'm trying to be incognito, and that lasted for about 5 minutes. But anyway, our guys went into all the stands to look at all the dispensers to see where possibly a bacteria would have entrenched itself. And in about 30 minutes, and then in the meantime, I'm getting harassed every second by these news people. And I sort of had a new feeling about paparazzis and Hollywood stars. I said, that's, but they just would be on you and touching you and microphones here. And I said, no comment, no comment. Unfortunately, during my no comments, the health inspector, when she arrived, had comments. That we just have to take care of these businesses that are destroying our students and bringing poison onto the campus, and we shouldn't have soft drinks on the campuses anyway. And we haven't found out anything. And then she finally came over to me, are you going to get this thing straightened out? Absolutely. Well, in 30 minutes, all of my white coat guys, I tell them always to wear white coats because it looks like they're official, come back, they found nothing, absolutely nothing in every stand. And so I say to her, we found nothing. She says, well, there's something. I said, well, we found nothing. And I said, basically, you can do whatever you want. You can bring your people in and inspect them if you want. But our people are pros at this, and they didn't find one thing. By this time, they've hauled 55 kids off in ambulances to the hospital. And that's tugging at my heart, seeing this happening. So anyway, we also have a very professional person that does interviewing on our staff there. In the meantime, she's interviewing people all over this place and really wanting to know what happened. Well, what happened was this. It was a warm night. The cheerleaders for Garfield High were down doing their thing on the track, yay, get a touchdown kind of thing. But they were wearing sweaters. And the heat in the sweaters, one of the girls that was doing her deal passed out. Well, the other yell leader grabbed the microphone and said, she's just been poisoned by Coke because I saw her set the Coke cup down before she did her routine. Well, what happened, there's a psychological relapse into the stands. And people that just had a Coke said, oh, I've been poisoned. So they are throwing up, and it wasn't a pretty sight, but about 55 of them got into this relapse. So they were going to the hospital to get their stomachs pumped for nothing. So we tracked all this down. We got people making their statements. Why am I telling you this story now? Because all the way through that, of course, I said an immediate prayer. I always said a prayer on any mission I went out to before I get out of the car, because I said, man, this is bigger than me. I need God. Not one time in that whole, by the way, that fiasco, what do you think that was on the LA Times the next morning? Front page. Coke poisoned students, and based on health inspector, whatever her name was, Dee Dee Smith, and nothing from me. So now I am really hot. My Christian values were sinking quickly in this whole thing. So I called the Times, who we had a running battle with anyway, but they gave us a retraction 2 days later. Where? Page 23. Page 23. Now, the reason this story is here, because I want you to understand what people are going through, even at management and director levels, but down into the maybe the lower ranks. See what they'd be exposed to. But not one time during all that did I ever think I would call my pastor for advice. Not one time. So I want you to understand there's still that divide, that you go to the pastor for certain things, but not that thing. So anyway, that's why I asked you that question. Do you think your people would come to you for business advice?
When did that happen?
I've tried to blank it out of my mind, but it happened in the late 80s, so it must have been 87, 86, 87, after the Olympics, because I was involved heavily in the Olympic Games here at 84, and represented Coke on the Olympic Committee, so we were really involved. And I could spend an hour telling you Olympic stories about how God interceded in many ways, and I'll tell you some more stories, and I know you'll probably not think they're true, but everything I tell you today is true. Okay, next question. Have you seriously even formulated an opinion regarding capitalism? The word there is seriously. I mean, you can sort of cast off your ideas, but I mean seriously. And finally, what do you do to assure proper financial accountability in your church? Proper financial accountability in your church. The reason I ask that question is there's so many pastors that don't understand the financial talent they have sitting out there in the pews. One of the most brilliant CPA women that I've ever known in 5 years was never asked by the church, would she like to be involved in looking over the finances of the church? So that's why I asked you about that. You know, what's your stewardship? Because remember, we're just managing these resources for the Lord. And we have a fiduciary responsibility to our congregation who is giving faithfully. Okay, so all those questions, I don't need your answers. I just want to know, put a big number between 0 and 10, how you think overall you fared in that grade. Now, if everybody has 10s, we can close in prayer. I told you the meat of this whole thing is understanding stress, tensions, and moral struggles in the workplace. That is really critical for all of you, and it's critical really for the business people that are out there that sometimes pass those tensions off. I think that some of you that do marriage counseling and you really got the black sock syndrome put into context, meaning it really isn't what's going on in the marriage, it's something else, and it just happens to trigger stuff in the marriage. 9 times out of 10 is something that's happening in a business. The husband had to lay somebody off, so now he's cranky for 3 days, or the wife had a problem with somebody in the department. So a lot of times, we need to understand that there are tensions. Okay, I'm going to start sort of like they do on TV. I'm going to start with 10 and we'll end up with number 1, but doesn't mean these, because they're 10, it's not important, but dealing with changes in the workplace environment is really critical in attention. Why? Because in today's marketplace, people are being laid off. So those people are in tension, but the ones that are left in the marketplace really have tension because they're asked to do more. They're asked to do 10 hours of work instead of 8. They're asked to come in on Saturdays and work, and there's quite a bit of tension in the workplace. There's a lack of understanding in the workplace because there isn't time to develop relationships with your customers, with your consumers. Another story, and you're going to hear a few of these, but I had an interesting sales manager in the LA area. Now, to be a sales manager in the LA area, you got to be tough, rough, cigar smoking, son of a gun. And that's what he was. And he owned the LA area for Coca-Cola. But I had a problem with him because his language didn't match up to mine. His adjectives were under the table. So we always had to have talk about, if we're going to talk and have a cup of coffee, we got to straighten this thing out. Well, one day he comes bolting through my door at Coke and says, hey, he always calls me, not boss, but Boos. Boos, I need you. We got a real problem at one of our big universities. Always had Coca-Cola in it. They're thinking about switching to one of our competitors. I said, no way, that's not going to happen. Oh yeah, there's really a turkey over there, a head of food service that has just given us and he's a director and he's a big shot, wears a coat and tie, and he's just wanting to make this change. I said, well, what's the problem? Well, I'm not sure. It's something about pricing. Well, let me tell you all. Every problem that gets to be in business, it's pricing. Whatever it is, it's pricing. And so I always take a deep breath on those requests because once I make the call on that account, I'm now the account manager. If they don't want to talk to him anymore, they'll call me directly. So I pick those and choose them carefully. But why I picked this one to go is because our chairman of the board was a graduate from there. And I wasn't about to lose an account that he graduated from and was quite a baseball player. In fact, the College World Series for them years and years ago. So we drove down and we pull up, and as I told you, every time I go on a call, I'd say a silent prayer before I got it. God, just give me the strength and the wisdom to deal with this controversy. And I always knew God was with me, and at times I looked around because I really needed him. Well, I needed him on this time. So we go into this, they're going to have luncheon first, table of 6, 2 of us and 4 of them. Fellow at the end, of course, coat and tie, and the person he told me about. So I said, Chuck, why don't you sit down here? And then he said, Mr. Tabor, why don't you come down here and sit next to me? I said, thank you. Now, you don't think God's in the middle of these things? I looked up, and he has the fish symbol on his lapel in his jacket. And I said, thank you, Lord. So I didn't start saying, gee, what's our problem? I had to cancel a meeting a couple of days before with him because I was teaching a men's Bible study and I was afraid I wouldn't get from there to the Bible study in time. So I said, I'm sorry I had to cancel Tuesday and reschedule for today because I'm teaching a Bible study. I just wanted to see the fish in the water a little bit. Oh, what are you studying? It's in the book of James. Oh, you know, we did that a couple of years ago. Where, don't you love that verse? Yeah, I do. And so, and then I said, yeah, I couldn't do it last night because my wife has choir. Oh, my wife and I are in the choir. Da, 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 da. So for the first 30 minutes, we talked about Bible studies and choir. Now I feel I've got him set up. Now, what's the deal? Why are we here? And he would dodge it. And he'd say, you know, next time you have a Bible study, you ought to do something. He said, you know, we did Philemon for 6 weeks. I said, you did? Dude, that didn't sound fun. So anyway, about 40 minutes go by, we finish our dessert. So his guy at the other end says, let's all adjourn to the conference room and we can see where we are and what our differences are. And he said, oh, no need for that. Mr. Tabor and I've settled everything. We're staying with Coca-Cola. I've never made a sales pitch, never mentioning the deal or defending my position or offering more money. And there we are. The Lord was in the middle of that and we became close friends. And we shared stuff back and forth, and I'd go by and see him, and we'd never talk business. But that's the integration of faith that's there. Now, if somebody in your congregation had that opportunity, are they well grounded to be able to deal with that, not in an arrogant way, but in a way that would have dialogue? So, that's dealing with the changes in the workplace environment. Okay, number 2, balance of life and obedience. This is more critical today than it's been in a long time because the balance of life, the church tugs at the responsibility of the business people right now. Can you come Saturday morning and set up chairs? Can you come Wednesday night and serve dinner? Can you teach 5th grade Sunday school? So they're getting challenged on the balance of their life, and a lot of them have children. A lot of them are in this piston up and down between family and work life and studying the Bible. And by the way, one of the things that is a fall away in today's fast track is the Bible. Some of the business people that I dialogue with, they used to get up 15 minutes every morning and get into their devotion, and it's down to 5. Now you say, well, that's 10 minutes. He can pick that up sometime during the day. It doesn't happen. So you got to know that. The other part of the obedience is what's happening is we need to start focusing on sexual purity, alcohol, and drugs. Within the church, it's there. Because of the stress levels, some of the work life people are looking to other things. And you can pick up the paper once a month and see even a pastor has that issue. My son goes to a church that the pastor resigned 6 months ago because of pornography. Been in that pulpit for 20 years. So don't think it can't be within your staff and within the church. The third one is personal health and work. Excuse me. Personal health and work. Great percentage of taking care of the body of the business person has fallen off. They used to jog every morning, walk every morning, play some handball, ride a bike. It isn't happening. They're working 10, 11 hours a day. They're tired. They're exhausted. On the weekend, they've got family responsibilities. And so it's not that they aren't doing it, but they're not taking care of their personal health. And they become a workaholic. So when I say personal health and work, that workaholic piece really gets into it. Not that they desire to do it, but they have a fear of losing their job. You know that majority of all decisions that are made every day are made only on 2 bases, fear or desire. Either desire to do something or you make the decision because you fear it, the consequence. So when you start matching up 2 things, that's it, desire or fear. So when you walk through the next week and you start making decisions, say, gee, was that by fear or was that by desire? Did I really want to preach or did I not want to preach? Or am I fearful about preaching? You know. So anyway, that's something you want to keep in mind. Okay, The next one, being a faithful witness in a secular marketplace. You know, that is one of the largest concerns to the business people today. Am I really doing what God wants me to? Am I prepared? How many people have come to you and said, I'm not even prepared to share the gospel with somebody? Well, they are, if they just tell their story. But there's a lot of business people that really shrink away. Number one is the reason they shrink away is because they're afraid they'll get lambasted in the workplace. Well, they can't start doing it on work time, but when they model something and they are looked at as somebody that makes concrete decisions and evaluates situations, then people ask them, gee, what makes you tick? But they have a real problem. That's a tension of them, how to be faithful. Let me talk to you about that, because one of the things that really bounces into their lap is what I told you before. We're talking about measuring full-time ministry versus secular careers. You know, Scott Ray and Ken Wong in their book said the weight of historical Christian thought seems to lean against wholehearted participation in business. The weight of historical Christian thought seems to lean against wholehearted participation in business. As a result, many who work in secular careers end up with a sense that their vocation or vocations are less valuable in the eyes of God. Now, isn't that sad that you're trying to develop missionaries for this business as ministry, and they feel that they are, if they're in the secular world, they're second-class citizens. Any of you read anything from John Beckett? He writes a lot of business books because he was a great business guy. But one of the things he said in one of his books really got to me. He said the clear impression was that to truly serve God, one must leave business and go into full-time Christian service. Now let me give you a lab course right now. Just take a little lab course. I was approached by a business person in our church and said, I understand you do some consulting. And I say, I do consulting, but I do not charge, so I'll be glad to sit down with you. So we went and had coffee, and here was his issue. A very successful business, $140 million a year in sales, 112 employees, and doing very well from a cash flow standpoint. So I sort of said, I think this is going to be the easiest consulting job I've ever had. I don't see any real problems there. So I said, well, what's your issue? Well, my wife and I went on 2 mission trips to Kenya with our church, and we fell in love with it. And our pastor really has encouraged us to go into full-time ministry and into Kenya. And he said, we started praying about it and looking at this, and I thought, well, I could sell my business. Oh, we said, you know, it'd be just so disappointing at 28 of them. I said, what do you mean 28 of them? Because he said, I have 28 strong Christians that have a Bible study every Friday morning. Oh. So anyway, I said, do you believe, I asked all of you the first question, do you believe the workplace is a mission field? He said, oh, absolutely. These 28 are just great. So let me pause there. That was his dialogue to me. Now what, as pastors, thinking for 2 hats on now, business and your ministry, and he's come to you now, he broke the mold. By the way, he didn't go to our pastor with this, our head pastor. So there's still that disconnect. So let's have some let's have some response here. How would you advise this fellow? Liz.
I would really try to do an intake interview with him and make sure that he is called before he just did that, just because he was told by someone else that is what vocational ministry is. There are lots of ways he could serve Kenya as a business person without and still be called to it and still serve as vocational ministry,
Yeah.
but not in pastoral.
Very good. That's a good answer. Others?
Well, we would address, I think, that term full-time ministry and say that you are in full-time ministry already.
Okay. Wanda, what would you tell them?
Well,
I want to have a woman's viewpoint on this deal.
I'm kind of with Michael, and especially because of the reading that we've had. I think there's this misconception that if I'm not working on staff at the church, then I'm not doing ministry. And when people can change that perspective, when that perspective changes and they understand that, wow, I am doing ministry even in my business or on my job, I am doing the work of the Lord, I am called, I think that can settle.
Well, why don't you and I switch places? You come up here and teach the rest, and I'll say, no, that's good.
On the other hand, though, if he is really called to be a missionary in that sense, he should do it. I have a friend, his name is Kevin Bugna, who left his business and left everything. He's building churches and building homes right now in South Africa, and is loving it and loves his life, and God has called him to it. And so if he is called to it, I want to encourage him to do it as well. I just want to make sure that he might be called to be a vocational business missionary.
Well, here's my advice to him, which is a combination of all three of yours. Basically, I said to him, let's take 110 and subtract 28, whatever that comes out, 70 something. If those people don't know the Lord, why are you going to Kenya? You got 70 people right under your nose that would be, and if you sold your company, where does that put them? They may find the Lord eventually, but that would be one option. Second option, I said, you can keep the business and do exactly, Jeff, what you said. You could part-time missionary and keep doing what you're doing with your wife, and maybe add a little bit to it, get somebody to back you up in your business so you can spend a disproportionate amount of your time that way. And other than that, you better go meet with the pastors, the church, to really understand calling and whether the calling is there. So those are the options I gave him. So I don't talk to him now for 30 days or more. I don't want to call him, but I sure would like to know what he decided. So he calls me. And I said, how you doing? He said, oh man, he said, I did what you said and met pastors and I prayed and I did all that. He said, here's my end result. I'm keeping the company. I'm going on a full-time ministry assignment within my company first and Kenya second. And he said, if things keep flowing, because God's blessed our company mightily, maybe I'll do the final thing and disproportionately let my son pick up some of the running of the business. So the issue is, the reason I'm saying that to you, there's not always one answer, because I gave you about all I had. I mean, there is not much more I knew about this than what I gave to you. So anyway, so I'm just bringing that to you, that sometimes people think to go into, you must leave business to go into full-time ministry. We talked about Tozer. I got another story. I'll tell you, this one is a dandy. This one is one that touched my heart mightily and really gave me a new sense of admiration for Guatemala. And I happened to be privileged to speak at an international business conference a few years ago, and a gal that was sitting there was from Guatemala. She came up to me afterwards, spoke beautiful English, and was in mission work in Guatemala City. And she said, we'd like to have you come over and speak to 4 or 5 groups on mentoring, because we have a mentoring society. Over there, the grandfather gives the business to the son, his son, and the mentoring is sort of a little bit shaky. So my wife and I went down there for 5 days and spoke to various groups, all secular, by the way. And she was a very strong Christian gal, and her partner in this was the son of the ex-vice president of the country. Strong Christian young man. He and his wife are beautiful people, welcomed us. showed us what was going on in Guatemala. They were building a 13,000 seat Christian church there. I mean, it was quite an eye-opener for me. Well, my last go-around, other than a radio interview, was with Christian businessmen and businesswomen in a breakfast meeting of about 200, 250 people. And the guy that was the MC, that was the assistant pastor of this church, and I mean, he was so dynamic, I was wondering why I was going to speak. But anyway, afterwards, he said, would I have a cup of coffee with him? I said, sure. So I said, you know, you were so dynamic in your presentation. No wonder this church is so on fire for workplace ministries. By the way, just a rabbit trail off of this, you know that Saddleback has 4,000 in workplace ministries, in Bible studies, just on workplace ministries. Started by a young lady that's very close to us, Helen Mitchell. And she started with about 20, about 4 years ago. Now there's about 4,000. So I'm telling you, people are hungry. So that was sort of a rabbit trail story. But anyway, he's saying, yeah, and we really have had Bible studies, and we've had these groups, and we've had a couple hundred people show up, and they're really on fire for the Lord. So I said, what do you do? And he said, oh, I own a business. And by the way, a lot of people that are in ministry in Guatemala also are in the workplace. In fact, I spoke at the university, and out of 55,000 in that university, in the business school, every one of the business professors had a real business, not just teaching. So anyway, he said, yeah, I have a business, and I thought it was, you know, nuts and bolts or something. It wasn't something that knocked me over. And he said, we have about 2/3 of the market share here. So I said, well, what's your strategies if you have 2/3 of the market share? Well, he said, it's simple. I just turn my business over to God. Okay, coming from a pastor, I thought I would hear that, but can you give me a little bit more? And so he said, yes, I can. He said, when I hire a key employee, such as a sales manager, marketing manager, production manager, or a financial person, the commitment they make to me is 5 years. And the commitment they make is I disciple them for 5 years. Outside of the workplace, we get together for 5 years, and I disciple them until they absolutely know integration of faith in the workplace. And that they can take it down to their people, and then they do the same discipling to some of their people. He had about 90% of his people knowing Christ in his business, all through this trickle down. Now, are you ready for this? I said, wow, that's exciting. Yeah, so when you finish discipling these people, what happens? Oh, he said, it's easy. I go to my number one competitor, and I say to him, you need to hire Mike Sanborn. Well, he says, well, he's your number one sales guy. Yeah, you need to hire him. He has sent 12 of his top people to his competitors over the years because he's sending them out as a missionary. He said, my market share keeps growing. And he'd run into his guys in the marketplace and said, boy, you got a lousy sales, but no, I'm sure glad I got rid of you, you know, kind of thing, kidding him. But he said, that's what was happening. They're converting our competitors. And we're going to talk about competition, as I told you, one of the tensions. And so his competitors love him. They won't undercut him, do things. His business keeps growing, and he's got these people out there readdressing themselves to compete against the guy who discipled him. His business has expanded into Houston, into Dallas. And he said, I said, well, that prayer life of yours must be strong. He said, the only thing I pray, Lord, I don't want any more. I can't take any more business. I don't want any more market share, but keep bringing me those people I can disciple. And so isn't that a heart that, you know, that's a story. And I sat there and I know my mouth was, I can't believe it. Here I've been in business 35 years. I never would have done that. Well, I may have if God really blistered me good on it, but I mean, that was not an idea that I had in my mind. Anyway, Christians really desire guidance to how to integrate into their work life and into their 24/7 life. And I think that is one of the misnomers that the church really has to. Why are there 1,250 really active work-life ministries out there today? I think it's just because they really go in and hit the nail on the head with the working people directly. And maybe their church isn't doing that for them. Many people are hungry to know how to integrate their faith and work. Unfortunately, most clergy don't know how to help these parishioners and often show benign neglect or even outright hostility towards the marketplace. A guy named David Miller wrote that, who does a lot on business. So, they don't know how to help them, so the pastors then show neglect rather than come together and say, what do you guys really need? Let's define it. You read John Knapp's book, but I love the one part in it. Equipping Christians for vigorous discipleship and public life may be the church's best hope for bringing the gospel to a world desperately in need of God's love. That was the best quote in that whole book. Equipping Christians for vigorous discipleship and public life may be the church's best hope for bringing the gospel to a world desperately in need of love. So we took care of, that takes care of being faithful witness in a secular marketplace. Let's talk about something that seems to be maybe a little more near and dear to our discussion here. About charity and wealth. Now, isn't that funny that would be a tension or a stress in the workplace? Well, why it is because the person in the workplace knows they have to make a gainful living to take care of their family, but they're pressured on saying, what about my wealth, and then how do I deal with charity, and how do I deal with my giving to the church and tithing and all the other things? Well, it becomes a real cat chasing its tail because they get caught up in both. That's why I talked to you about the two ideologies of wealth and support for the poor. I'm going to give you two positions here. Not sure which position you will line up with because I don't know your backgrounds. But number one from John Schneider. He says, emphasizes the great potential for good through the expansion of good business and wealth creation to benefit all the world, including the poor, for God's kingdom purposes. So he's saying you build it through the expansion of good business, you create wealth and benefit the world for the poor in God's kingdom purposes. Now that is versus Ron Sider, who has a little bit of a green background, but he sticks behind his statement, as opposed to the ideology that gives greater emphasis to reducing the use of Earth's resources, that's the green part of him, and the redistribution of Christian wealth as the primary solution for addressing poverty. So do you see the difference there? It's saying that business drives it, the wealth of business comes back down and takes care of those kind of things, versus, okay, you get it, you give it to the church, or you give it in a redistribution factor to take care of the poor. Now, there may be a combination of the two, but I'm saying those are two sets that you got to know in your mind when you're dealing with business people within your church, where's their mindset? If you're trying to say to him, all the wealth you're generating, just give it to me and we'll take care of the people in India, I'm not sure they're going to buy off on that. They may do things to help you with missions, but they have a lot of other charities. I help our church, but I help numerous charities outside of our church also. So those are two conflicts that you got to understand and deal with. Anybody have any question on those two? Did that come clear enough?
Can you say that again?
Yeah, well, the one of them is basically you do good through the expansion of good business. Doing good business doesn't mean, prostitution, drugs, or whatever, but you do good through good business and wealth creation. So a business that, desires wealth creation to benefit all in the world, including the poor in God's kingdom. Let's look at Warren Buffett. $30 billion he's given to charities. They may not be all Christian based, if any, but that's helping the poor. But if he hadn't generated the wealth, he couldn't have given that. As opposed to giving greater emphasis to reducing the use of the earth's resources, meaning business reduces its compounding effect upon the resources that they deal with, whether it's water, steel, whatever, to make their business run. And redistribution of Christian wealth as the primary solution to helping the poor. Well, look at this country. We've redistributed wealth for 3 decades heavily, and I think our poverty level in this country is probably about the same. So it's not necessarily the redistribution of wealth, it's what you do with that and how you do it and to impact the poor. So those are 2 different mindsets, one through business, one through redistribution of Christian wealth. Is that clear? Clear? Okay.
Basically the 2 political parties, in other words.
Well, no, I'm trying to keep the political piece out of this. I'm just trying to say many times pastors can get so linked into their church and their mission work that they believe their parishioners' main purpose is to redistribute that wealth back to that church so he can do more in India. See, so listen, everything I say, I'm not talking about each one of you individually. I'm just trying to give you an overview. But I mean, that was one of the critical things. As opposed to calling the business people in and helping them grow their business and achieve things and letting God take care of the heart of that person and where they're going to give the money. Because on your sheets I gave you, you don't have to look it up, but Andrew Perriman says, we cannot ignore the fact that wealth is a positive resource. Wealth is a positive resource. It is a hazardous resource, certainly, but listen to this now, but within a redeemed community, there should be the wisdom and grace available to handle wealth responsibly. It's a great statement, because within the redeemed community, we garner the wisdom and the grace to handle it. Ken?
I've had an interesting conversation with a number of people in our church in regards to, and you seem to touch on it a little bit, just when you said you give to your church, you help your church out, and then you help other charities as well. This idea of, if I'm going to give $100,000 a year to the Lord's work, a big umbrella, I'm going to give a portion to the church and a portion to World Vision and a portion to Campus Crusade and a portion, and they don't necessarily think of that as I'm going to give more to one or the other. They put the church into the whole pie of I'm giving to the kingdom. How would you see that? How would you see that? And how would you help us to communicate with people in that regard? Because there's a lot of interesting ways that they work through that. Some set foundations up, they give it into the foundation, and they give that to these organizations so they get the tax benefit of that. And I mean, I think it's okay to be smart in how we use our money, but how is that an act of worship and giving, and how does that all play out?
Well, let me take it down to the grassroots. I think you're doing a good thing at talking to your congregation. The congregation must have trust in the management of the tithing that goes into that church. That's number one, and that's some of the things. That's why I asked all of you about, you have accountability in the financial end of the one thing I hear more from business people, they don't trust the financial management of the particular church at times. So they may designate to a certain mission in your church, which they can do. But on the other side, my answer is you follow God's command, and I think tithing is a command, and people should tithe to the church. Now, if they have extra and they like Campus Crusade or they like whatever, I think that's up to them and God to deal with. Where God knows where the resources need to be applied, and they're His resources. So I think when you sit down and you pray about it, my wife and I do that every year. And the thing about it is, but the church comes first. The church gets its, we don't take out of the church to give. We add to the church. Now that's just our personal, you asked about the personal piece.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate you sharing that, thank you. That's my personal opinion as well.
Yeah.
But it's difficult, when I sit down with a friend of mine who is a person of wealth, and he's like, I'll give, if I'm gonna give $100,000, I'll give 20 to the church, but I got all this other stuff I'm doing, and And my conversation with those people has been more, no, you're giving to those things because you think you can control it, and you get, and it's sexy because you can see an immediate return for that. But if you give it into the church, that's going to be used for general operating expenses, that's going to be used for ministry, that's going to be used for all different kinds. Nobody wants to buy toilet paper. Everybody wants to support the kids in Africa. So there's this tension,
Who need toilet paper?
you know, what's that?
Those kids need toilet paper.
Yeah, there's this tension, you know, in this
Well, you know-
giving to the kingdom, so that's all I'm supposed to
Well,
do.
but that may be where they are in their life. But I would say motive of the heart is the crucible in all of this. And if I know, and when you touch the motive of the heart, and the motive of the heart isn't quite as pure, it's between them and God in prayer. Man, you as a man will never change their thought process. You will give them ideas, but the end result is like the guy who kept his business and didn't sell it. He made that decision with God. It wasn't man telling him that you can only give. So to me, it's just one of those fundamental things. But the more you're with him and the more you show what the church does. I mean, we have a huge Hispanic ministry in our church, about 250. And they have their certain meetings and all that. Well, they have people supporting them outside of the tithing to our general church. See, so it's one of those things. So anyway, I don't want to get down that rabbit trail too far, but I'm just saying to you, it is you communicating one-on-one, bringing God into it, praying about it, and letting God touch the heart of that, because it is the motive of the heart for giving, and that's all I...
Yeah, well, I hear that, and I appreciate that. It's just, I have people that are mature in their faith, and they still see it that way.
Well,
And one of them is a former elder.
that's why he's a former. No, Well, let me leave you there. We have to deal in this viewpoint with economic illiteracy. Economic illiteracy is one thing that the church needs to get their arms around, so you're on the same page of the people that are working. I bet 90% of the people in your congregation are working some way. And please don't make the mistake about a housewife not working. My wife corrected me in one speech I gave. So anyway, everybody has to understand that, and I think it's a communication situation. See, I think business has the greatest opportunity to solve poverty around the world. Why? They provide jobs and gainful employment, and you get your income out of it. You get your maybe benefits. It's interesting about health benefits. I come from the era that, it was not a right, it was a privilege to get health benefits. I worked for two businesses that didn't even have health coverage. It became a competitive issue down the line. But anyway, I think that's going to solve the poverty. Why? Because you get good people working, and you can get in the capital market, and you can get capital for your company, and you can buy some equipment to make your product faster and cheaper. Oh, by the way, there are people that needed to build that equipment that you bought. So there's a whole chain of economics going on here. So when you're driving productivity and a supply demand, what do you think happens to price? Goes down. Who benefits the most in a percentage of pricing going down? The poor. So the key is business is the one that can transition that properly looked at around the world. Okay, that's enough on that subject right there. So, okay, let's talk about, I did talk to you about family and work. Did I tell you about family and work? Oh, that's the next one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is number 6. Family and work. I don't even have to talk to you about that. Because you got family people come to you, you got kids that need counseling, you got wives that need counseling, you got husbands that need counseling, all built around the fast track society that we have today. I just hate a microwave oven because that makes us a microwave society. I mean, I remember you had to get out of your car to go into McDonald's. You had to get out of your car to go to Starbucks. I mean, it is a microwave. And that's our society. And that's the trouble in the family right now. And I think we need to know that. Michael and I have had a privilege to hear Dallas Willard speak a couple of times, and Michael probably many more times than I, but I really love his writings. And so, if you keep in mind, and of course work was ordained in the Garden of Eden, and we know that through the process of work. But Dallas broke it down into 4 concepts, and I think you should maybe make note of these, because maybe you already have in this class, and sorry if I'm repeating some of the things you've done, but he's saying, number 1, job is what I'm paid to do and how I earn my living. That's what a job is. Number 2, ministry. It's that part of God's special work in my time that He has specifically allotted me. The fellow that wanted to sell his company and his ministry went over, to Kenya and worked on that, or some of the other people. God allots you that time. Number 3, his definition of work. I love this. The total amount of lasting goods that I will produce in my lifetime. In your lifetime. That's what work is. Which leads you to number 4, which is life. That's me, my experience, and who I am. So everybody understands, that one of the tensions is work and family. Okay, let's get the next one. This one is an interesting one because at times in the business world, you really get caught up in it, and that is humility and the ego of success. It's pretty easy.
That's number 7.
Yeah, is this another?
7, that's number 7. It's pretty easy to get caught up in the ego of success. And I was one. When you don't have to drive to the airport yourself, and you have some transportation things that you don't have to think about, and it breeds prestige, power, and boy, Satan just runs that track as fast as he can run it. And I think that's one of the keys that we have to deal with, because the ego is success. By the way, Ken Blanchard's definition of ego? Anybody know? Edging God out. Every time your ego goes up, you're edging God out. Humility is one of the critical aspects that God puts into your heart when He puts you into running a business. But the real issue is humility. And humility is a tough thing to get your arms around. That's why I put humility verses for you on your I think it was your gray sheet that had, or it was the sheet on Proverbs that you have. Okay, so let's go to the next one. People's needs and profit obligations are a huge stress factor in the workplace. I have to make profit, but I got the needs of these people. How do I deal with a wage increase, or how do I deal with more vacations, but I'm still trying to make the bottom line? That is a huge factor. Now, the needs of the people will vary from business to business, but each of the business knows that they can't do any of this without their profit obligations. And we're going to spend, after the break, some quality time talking about profit obligations and God's view of profit. Anybody have any questions now? I've given you 8, haven't I?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
You, right before this one, you said about humility.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you're making 100 million your salary, one of those executives.
Is that a month or a year?
A year.
Okay, okay.
You make 100 millions. God has given you that money, and you have privilege to hire drivers around and buying a nice car, and you just do it because you have the money. Enjoying that kind of life because you have the money, is that bad or?
No. No, see, I'm not saying that money, you just can't have that as an idol worship. But the point being is, I always use good business. If you made your money in good business, and good business transactions, God gave you the wisdom and the brain, and you're able to achieve that. Now you have to deal with God. What am I going to do with your money, God, your resources? Now, a quick story, then I'll no, I don't think that's bad. I mean, cars or material things are fine. I don't think there's anything negative about that. It's just how you do it in a humility way. Look what I got, look what I made, is certainly that ego of success shadowing over your humility. God has blessed me. What can I do more for God? Or what can I do with this? Interesting story, then I'm going to let you take a break. We had a high school Bible study at our house for 5 years. We had about 80 students. Derner had to remodel the house after 5 years, but that was all right. God blessed us with a house that we probably shouldn't have had. A large house, and one that would put these students in there. Before we started, I think, year 3 or year 4, God did bless me with a bonus in my business at Coca-Cola. And my wife right away said to me, for 20 years, you wanted a Corvette car. Take that money and go buy the Corvette. She was just so tired of hearing about it. I mean, she wanted to just put that thing to bed, you know. And, you know, I felt, oh, gosh, she wants me to do it, so I don't want to do it, you know, kind of thing. So anyway, I prayed about it. And the dealer there in La Habra was a good friend of mine. He said, you know, come on. If you don't want it, I'll take it back from you. So anyway, I get this Corvette, brand new. Of course, I keep it in my garage with a cover on it. Now we start this Bible study in year 3 or 4. We always start in September and in May, and this is about November. There's a knock at the door, and I open the door, and I know God says you do not judge by the external appearance, you judge by the heart, right? And Samuel said that? I'm sorry, but I was judging from the external. I got this guy at the door. He's got the hair all over the place, and he's got stuff hanging down and all in black, and I'm thinking, golly, we just passed Halloween. I didn't know he was here. But anyway, so he said, my sister says you have a party going on here. She comes here every Monday. I said, it's a Bible study. Well, he said, I don't care about the Bible study, but she said, you have a Corvette. And I said, I do. He said, well, I'm studying auto mechanics at Diamond Bar High. And he said, I'd like to write a paper on that. Well, sure, come on in. So I go in the garage, take the tarp off, throw the hood up. And he's got his pen. This was pre-laptops and all that. And he's writing all his notes. I said, by the way, when you finish, I'm teaching what we did. We broke up in all kinds of rooms in our house, and I had the kitchen. We had about 6 or 8 people. And I said, come on in and join us. So he did, but he sat over by the sink. He wasn't about to come to the table, the kitchen table. I thought it was okay. This went on until March 1st, every single Monday night. He brought his tablet. I threw up the hood, and he wrote his paper. Then he'd come in, but guess what? Every Monday night, that chair got closer to our table. So in about March, he was at the table. And I said, well, you need a Bible. He said, I don't even have a Bible. So I got him a new Bible. Yeah, I don't even know how to find anything. I showed him where the contents were. So in about another week, he'd gone through that, and he came back and said, well, I can find that. If I said, anybody know where, you know. He wasn't about to pray, but he wasn't about to ask for prayer until May 1st. Guess what he was praying for? That he could graduate, because his grades weren't good, he'd cut school, and he was one of those characters. So I said, sure, we'll pray. In fact, this was right after Easter, so it wasn't May 1st. So May 1st, I hear a knock on the door. I open, I don't even recognize him. Levi's, white t-shirt, tennis shoes, burr haircut. So what happened to you? He said, you know, I was reading that Bible. He said, I don't think I was really honoring God in what I was doing. And so he said, so anyway, he came in, we visited, never accepted Christ at that Bible study that I knew of. He didn't come to me and say he did, but he was right in it. And he graduated and never heard from him since. But guess what happened during the summer? I lost all desire for the Corvette and sold it. God used a material tool in a mighty way. And this kid was on drugs. He got off of drugs during this period of time. And so I'm answering your question is, don't be God. If you're buying a car and your motive of your heart is correct, I'm not saying you or what your example, God's going to use things in a powerful way if the motive of your heart is correct. I've never wanted a Corvette since. But the point being is, I'm just trying to give you that as a quick answer. Well, it wasn't a quick answer, but it was a real answer that impacted some young man's life. So what's the value of a soul? Certainly not a $25,000 Corvette, but that's what the tool was that got him to come every Monday night.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
A lot of our members, Christians, very dedicated ones. The problem is they don't know how to enjoy what God has given to them. They always think about, I need to live frugal life. I need to be faithful servants and not able to enjoy the things that God has given to them. And somehow they have this guilt trip on their back of their minds that I need to be faithful. And in so doing that, their lives are so miserable in a lot of ways. And Jesus came to give us freedom. Just to be trying to be too faithful. In doing so, they are becoming bondage to the wealth that God has given them.
Well, again, that's them and God have got to deal with that. I mean, and are you a pastor?
Yeah.
Well, as their pastor, there has to be, some counseling, some mentorship, and we're going to talk about mentorship because that's a great mentor assignment. And so I don't have that answer. Hey, listen, I'm far from a theologian or a pastor. I'm out of my league here with you guys. But I will tell you that you need to deal with that with the Lord and over a process. Take it over a process of time. Yes.
I was just going to share something that happened, kind of happened again yesterday, but a couple weeks ago, I went off and left my wallet. I took my wallet out to take my daughter to school, took it out of my purse, got home, put it on the kitchen counter, and then later that day picked up my purse and left to go to the grocery store and some things. So I get to the grocery store. I needed to get one item, something for my daughter to take to her at school, and I didn't have my wallet. And I thought, man, and she needed it. It was a time thing, crunch, Like, I just need to buy this, get this one item, and in addition to get her food and take it to her school. So I asked for the manager. First I went to the checkout. I was looking around the store, I'm like, any other time I'd run into somebody that I knew, that I could say, can I borrow $5? Didn't see anybody I knew.
Well, they knew you were there. They were ducking. They knew.
So I went to the checkout, the office area, and I asked, I'm like, could I just get this? I promise you, I will bring the money back. And so the guy's like, well, I had my checkbook, but I didn't have my driver's license. So they said, well, no, you gotta have the driver's license, you gotta have or cash or debit card or whatever. I said, can I talk to the manager? So then the manager comes. I know that woman is a Christian. I could just feel it in her spirit. She said, no problem, sure. And I said, I promise you, I'll bring, no problem, okay, I'm gonna bring it back. So I went but long story short, I was able to get it, take it back. But what I realized, you can do nothing. You have no power, you can do nothing without money in this economy. Nothing. I could not even buy this one item at the grocery store because I didn't have $5. And so, as children of the kingdom, it's okay. We need money, and what the Bible says, God has given us the ability to make wealth. And so, I think bottom line is, it is a matter of the heart and what we do with what God has given us, because without money, we can do nothing. We cannot.
Yeah.
Nothing. I mean, I just felt so powerless.
Now, see, I grew up in the era, that's all I had. There was no credit cards. Then the credit cards came in and interfered in the money exchange, but you're exactly right.
So we don't have to feel guilty.
No, I don't think, and I would take that away. I don't think, you need to talk to them, mentor them. That they should not have a guilt feeling. But if God has touched their heart to be a little austere with their giving because He may have something in mind for them in the future and they're building up to do this, that's them and God. But if they are not joyful, By the way, I'll give you one little quickie. At Christmas time, see, when you have grandkids, you come up with these little deals at Christmas. And some of you may have this. But here is your life mission statement built around joy. Joy, J-O-I, at Christmas. So hang them up. If you got kids and you got people, J-O-I. This is your life mission statement in this order. Jesus, others, and you. That's the deal. And you keep that in priority in your life, that one little deal. All my grandkids say, oh, Grandpa, you're not going to ask us that again, are you? Yeah, I just want you to understand. Were you jumping ahead of others at school today, or were you putting Jesus down in your value issues today?
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.